on Saturn. In Judaism, in order to be considered orthodox or somebody that's considered to be practicing true Judaism, you're required to wear this thing called the Tefflin. And the Tefflin is this cube-shaped black box that they wear on their arm and on their head. They insert verses from the Torah inside this black box. And then they take one part of the Tefflin that has these tassels attached to it. And then they're required to wrap it around their arm exactly 7 times. And it goes on whichever arm is opposite your dominant arm. So if you're right-handed, you'd put it on your left arm. And if you're left-handed, you put it on your right arm. And then the second part of the Tefflin is placed on top of the head. They say that placing the Tefflin on the arm is supposed to symbolize committing your heart to God, because the arm is the closest thing to the heart. And placing it on the head symbolizes complete commitment of the mind. And it's actually a part of the Judaic law that the Tefflin has to be in the form of a cube. Otherwise, it's not considered a true Tefflin. And they say that the practice of wearing this Tefflin goes all the way back to the days of Moses. They believe it was a direct commandment from God after he brought the Israelites out of captivity in Egypt. And they point to a lot of different verses in the Torah where they say that God commanded them to start doing this. In the King James Bible, they usually point to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And they believe that in ancient times, all the followers of the Judaic God wore a Tefflin every single day, 24 hours a day, to symbolize their complete commitment to this God. Now you fast forward to today, and they kind of toned it down to where now they're required to put the Tefflin on every morning during their morning prayer, but they're still required to wear the Tefflin every single day. It's already peculiar enough that these people are wearing a black cube on their arm and on their head that looks quite a lot like the Kaaba cube that Muslims walk around during the Hajj. But then you have to think about the fact that they have to wrap the tassels around their arms 7 times, just like Muslims have to make that rotation around the Kaaba 7 times. And then you got both the Bible and the Quran really pushing the Sabbath. And then both of these religions are coming out of the Middle East, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and you have all this cube symbolism. I mean, there's even more connections to be made through geometry, even with the Christian cross or the crucifix. When you look at that traditional form of the cross that we're so accustomed to seeing, if you take that cross laid out flat in 2D and you begin to fold it, at the end, you're going to end up with a cube, because a cross can be perfectly divided into 6 sides. And when you fold those 6 sides into a 3-dimensional form, you get a cube. And so looking at the reverse side of that, a cube, when it's unfolded and broken down to a 2D form, becomes a cross. So a cross is another form of a cube. And then what's wild is that if you look at the symbol that's used to represent Saturn in astrology, you can see it. You have the cross with the scythe coming out of it. Now, granted, a couple of the other planets do have a cross, but Saturn is the only one besides the Earth that has that traditional form of the cross facing up. And in astrology, they say that the cross actually represents basically this 3rd-dimensional world that we live in. So everything that's made up of matter, everything that's physical, that cross represents in astrology. And then you got the scythe coming out of the cross. And remember, that scythe goes back to Kronos, or the Greek god Saturn. So it's like it's alluding to a connection between the physical world and the god Saturn, almost like it's hinting that there's a connection between the two. Even the Star of David that you see on the flag of Israel, and that's considered like one of the most important symbols of Judaism, is a hexagram. And a hexagram is a 6-pointed star that is literally just the outline of a hexagon. Those 6 points on the hexagram perfectly align to give you a hexagon. And then if you look even closer at the hexagram, right in the middle, you can actually see a fully formed hexagon. And then we know a hexagon is going to take you right back to a cube. And you can see this same shape of a hexagram in the symbol for the atom. And you know, the atom is the most basic element that makes up this physical reality. It's literally what every physical thing is composed of. Everything is made up of atoms. So just like the cross in astrology, the hexagram or the hexagon is being used to represent this physical reality, this material world, everything on a physical level. A lot of people over the years have pointed out what seems like all of this Saturn symbolism in mainstream media. For years, people have been pointing this stuff out. And when you look at a lot of these TV shows, movies, even just the commercials, there does seem to be this strong influence pointing back to Saturn. There's a lot of little hints that seem to point in that direction, especially when it comes to a lot of the movies. It seems like that's where it's the strongest. Once you have an idea of like all the symbolism that can be connected back to Saturn, it's crazy how this stuff just starts to like jump out at you. You have so many major companies who seem to have their logos, sometimes even the name of the products, the slogans that they're using to sell the products, so many things that seem to connect. And sometimes it seems really subtle. Sometimes it seems like it's being put right in front of your face. But you can see bits and pieces of this symbolism all throughout mainstream media. And when you start looking into it, it's actually really surprising just how far a lot of this stuff stretches back. There is a long trail of this stuff stretching throughout the years. And like I said, in some cases, it's so subtle that if you didn't know what to look for, you wouldn't even know it was there. And then other times you can't miss it. But when you combine a lot of this stuff all together, it all seems to connect. And it's like we're getting it from all sides, so many different forms of media. And it almost seems like years ago, it was a lot more in your face. The symbolism was a lot less subtle and it was kind of just out there. Even in the music, Stevie Wonder wrote an entire song about Saturn all the way back in 1976. It was on his album Songs in the Key of Life. And he said he originally wrote it about his hometown. And then one of his producers convinced him to change the song from his hometown to Saturn. And whatever the case may be, whether he understood what he was putting out there or not, when you listen to the lyrics of this song, it comes off like he was trying to say something without actually saying it. And it's just another one of those things that makes you think all this stuff is connected in some way. And there is the chance that all of this is just a really big coincidence, that a lot of this stuff just so happens to seem to connect and lead back to Saturn. But again, if all of this is a coincidence, it's a huge coincidence. And looking at all this, it seems pretty safe to say there is definitely something that at the very least is worth paying attention to when it comes to this stuff dealing with Saturn. Another odd thing to point out are these black cubes that you can find spread out throughout different parts of the world. You have these giant black cubes that are placed in all these different spots all over, from Australia to Europe, all the way to California. And they're all supposed to have been created by different people, independent artists, people who are not connected to each other at all. But somehow they all got inspired to sculpt these giant black cubes. And again, you can find these things all over the place. And when you find them, they're usually going to be in these really odd locations, in the middle of a business district, randomly sitting in a suburban neighborhood, on the roof of a kids museum, just in these really awkward spots. And they're always large and they're always black. And it's crazy. You have people doing everyday normal things in these normal surroundings, these normal settings. And then right in the middle of all of that, you have one of these cubes completely out of place. And you can really get a feel of just how huge these things are when you see actual people walking next to these things. You can really get a sense of the scale. These things make an average human being look like an ant. They're massive. And then to transport them to these specific spots, it just seems very purpose driven. And the one in New York City is the one that really caught my eye. This one was made by another independent artist, but it was sculpted all the way back in 1966. And then the following year, 1967, it was given as a gift to the city of New York by an anonymous donor, just a random donation from an unknown person. This is the actual story behind this thing. And this was actually the very first permanent sculpture in New York City. So it was the very first sculpture to actually have a part of it built into the ground in New York City. And the city of New York takes a lot of pride in this thing. Like I said, it's been around since 1967. And as you can guess, over the years, it's gotten a little banged up here and there. And the city has put over $180,000 in renovations into this thing. And when it was represented to the public in 2016, it was this huge deal. They had this big presentation just for them reinstalling it into the ground. And all of the city officials came together and basically celebrated the renovation and return of this sculpture. Now, what's really interesting about this particular black cube, one, not only is it tilted to the side at the perfect angle to form a hexagon, this thing was constructed to where it's able to spin on its axis. And this is one of the big attractions for a lot of the people who come and visit this part of New York, is to come together as a group and spin this black cube around. And it does usually take more than one person to spin this thing because of just how heavy it is. It's supposed to weigh somewhere around 1,800 pounds. So it usually takes at least a couple of people to get it moving. Now remember, this cube is tilted at the perfect angle to form a hexagon. So you have this cube slash hexagon rotating around in a circle on its axis, really similar to the hexagon rotating on Saturn's North Pole. And just like the Kaaba, the dates don't line up. This cube was sculpted in 1966. And again, from what we're being told, there was no knowledge of that hexagon spinning on Saturn until 2006. So that's more odd stuff going on with the timeline. But yeah, this rotating hexagonal black cube has been sitting in the middle of New York for a long time. And the craziest part is you have little miniature versions of this same cube in other locations outside of New York. There's one in Southampton, Miami, Michigan, Ohio, Connecticut. You've got little miniature versions of this thing scattered across the country with the same exact design, a spinning black cube tilted perfectly to form a hexagon. And back in New York City, not too far from that spinning black cube, is the United Nations headquarters. And it's open to the public. You're able to freely tour this building as long as you're over the age of 25. And inside the United Nations headquarters, they have a meditation room. And it's almost a completely empty room outside of some benches where you can sit, an abstract painting on the wall in the back of the room, and a black rectangular structure carved out of iron, dead center in the middle of the room. And like I said, people are able to freely come into the United Nations headquarters as tourists and enter this room and meditate. And this room has been a part of the headquarters since it was first built in 1952. And there's a light placed directly above the sculpture. And they say it's supposed to symbolize the light of the sun beaming down and giving life to everything on earth. But it's interesting because remember, in Hinduism, the god Shani is born directly under his father, the sun. And that's what ends up giving him that black hue. But they say that they specifically designed the room as an altar to the unknown god that's worshipped by many names, because obviously the United Nations caters to every nation. Now, clearly this sculpture is carved in the shape of a rectangle. And when you look at that rectangle through the lens of geometry, a rectangle in its third dimensional form is considered a cuboid because it has those 6 symmetrical sides, just like a cube. And all the angles in a cuboid are right angles. And so because of this, these shapes are placed into the same category as a cube. But once again, we have yet another black cubical object in what seems like another odd location. And this one's being used to symbolize all world religions. And this black cube symbolism seems to be integrated into everyday life, things that we do regularly without even thinking about it. You can see a form of that black cube symbolism with the graduation cap, because that graduation cap is usually black and it has that cube-like shape to it. So when you wear a graduation cap, it's like you're literally wearing a black cube on the top of your head. And when you look into the history of it, it goes all the way back to the Roman Catholic Church and something that they have been wearing for centuries called the Canterbury cap. They even refer to it as the square cap. And literally, when you look at it, it's a square cap. But when you look at it, you can clearly see the roots of the graduation cap. And what's interesting to me is that the technical name for the graduation cap is the mortarboard. And the only other time you see that word mortarboard is when you're dealing with actual masons, people that build structures. They use a mortarboard to transfer the cement onto the bricks. And it is this square shaped board, just like the top of the graduation cap. But what a coincidence that they would use mason terminology to describe this black cube shaped cap that you basically earn by moving up the ranks of society or the system, a system set up by people that seem to have this really strong connection to Saturn. So who or what is Saturn? Well, if you notice, there's a strong similarity between the word Saturn and the word Satan. And even though there's no concrete proof that the word Satan comes from the word Saturn, when you look back at how we originally got that popular depiction of Satan with the horns and the tail, that whole depiction of Satan was taken directly from the Greek god Pan. And Pan was a hybrid. He was 1/2 human and 1/2 goat. And you can see how he has the upper body of a human outside of the horns and the ears, and the lower body of a goat with the hindquarters, the tail, and everything. And Pan was considered the god of the wild. So like untamed, undomesticated nature. Also the god of rustic music and the god of lustful sex. There's a lot of depictions of Pan that I can't even show here because it might get this video taken down. But you'll usually see these really sexualized depictions of Pan. And this is actually where we get the term pansexual. You know, somebody that's open to like all different types of sex with anybody and anything. That comes from the god Pan. And one of the really weird things about Pan is that he doesn't have an actual origin story. It's like he just kind of came out of nowhere. Some people say he was the son of Zeus, and then some people say he was the adopted brother of all the rest of the Olympians. Some people say that he's older than all of the Olympians. Either way, there's no true origin of Pan, but eventually the Roman Catholic Church took those characteristics of Pan and gave them to Satan. And this is where we got that half man, half goat depiction of Satan, which actually in some cases would be a full goat. Now, going back into astrology, if you look at the symbol for Saturn in the zodiac, actually it's the sea goat, which is 1 part goat and 1 part fish. So you have the symbolism there linking the goat to Saturn. And the explanation that they give for why they chose the goat is because when you look at that constellation, the outline of the stars forms something that looks similar to a goat's horn. And you can definitely see that outline in the pattern of the stars of this constellation. But what makes it seem like that goat horn was meant to represent something else is because of the way that Saturn is depicted in the tarot. Because literally Saturn is represented by the devil in the tarot. And if you look at it, you'll notice that you have the devil sitting on top of a black cube. And then you have 2 human beings, a male and a female, chained to that black cube, which is causing them to take on the features of the devil. So a human being operating completely from their lower nature, completely from their animalistic, basic instincts. And remember, that's exactly what that god Pan is about, that untamed animalistic nature, giving fully into your lower nature and basically giving fully into the material world without any type of self-discipline or higher thought, which all come from the mind. So again, matter over mind. And remember that symbol for Saturn in astrology with the cross cube representing matter and the physical world, and then Saturn's scythe being attached to that cross. Well, you're basically getting the same thing here with human beings being chained to that black cube of the devil. Just right here, you have the devil replacing Saturn. So whoever made this a thing in planetary astrology and in tarot with the goat and the devil leading back to Saturn, they were really trying to push this point home about the connection between Saturn and Satan.